Think it's too late for action? Think again. Think Scotland, a country rethinking the future and striving to create a net zero economy which works for all, right here, right now. We're already making changes and finding solutions for the future of everyone. Think world's firsts.
Scotland is home to the world's first floating wind farm. Floating wind has the potential to power 12 million homes across Europe by the year 2030.
Think of a country renowned for engineering heritage, and even today we're still making waves as the home to the world's first wave and tidal energy test centre. A country pioneering and innovating new sources of green energy. Think carbon capture. Think having the energy to create change. Think all electricity supplied only from renewable sources. Think ambition. Think of a mission of an entirely electrified rail network and making a zero carbon transport network a reality. Think one of Europe's biggest hydrogen fuel bus fleets and the world's first diesel-electric hybrid ferries. Think having the appetite for real change. Then think vertical farming and technology and expertise to provide safe drinking water around the world. Now is the time to think green investment and green innovation. Think of a country making history whilst reshaping the future. A future free from greenhouse gases. We're powering on to power the world in an entirely new, eco-friendly way. Now, think change. Then think of your business being part of it, delivering a net zero future for all. Think different. Think Scotland. Scotland is now.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Really interesting session that we've got focused on the Green Cities agenda. One of the aspects that we'll be looking at this morning is particularly, I suppose, how do you deliver that kind of strategy? And unusually, certainly for us, and I think also usefully for everybody, there's a real mix this morning in terms of the panels, both I guess on the public and the private sector, and also looking then at the collaboration and how that really can drive forward a green city agenda. So we've got a super panel here for you this morning. So we've got Councillor John Alexander, who's chair of the Scottish Cities Alliance and leader of Dundee City Council. We've got Jillian Hardy, who's a director of buildings for ARUP. We've got Councillor Lyle, who's leader of Perth and Kinross Council. Rob Martin, who's director of research for real assets and also sustainability for legal and general investment management. And Councillor Jenny Laing, who's co-leader of Aberdeen Council. So starting with you, Jillian, just a very kind of brief introduction of who you are and what you do, just for anybody who doesn't know.
My name's Jillian Hardy. I'm a director for the ARUP buildings team, covering Scotland, Northern Ireland and the northeast of England. For those of you that don't know ARUP, we're a global independent firm of designers, planners, engineers, architects, consultants, technical specialists, and we work across every aspect of the built environment, really trying to help our clients drive change, particularly on low carbon cities.
Super, great, thanks Jillian. Rob.
So I'm Rob Martin. I work within the real assets part of legal and general investment management. We are part of the legal and general group. As an investment manager, our job is to acquire and manage assets on behalf of clients. A big part of that is actually investing legal and general's own capital, but actually the majority of our money is from third-party clients, in particular pension funds is a very big part of our client base. The part of the business that I operate in is what we call direct investments, so not so much focusing on buying shares in companies or corporate bonds, but actually lending directly to firms and organizations, or owning and managing assets on behalf of, as I say, in long-term investors. My role is, I really wear two hats. One is sort of general strategy, where do we want to participate in the markets, but with a particular emphasis more recently on ESG, because it has become, I have to say, completely integrated with investment strategies for many, many clients. So really it's very hard to differentiate two things now.
Great, thanks very much, Rob. And I think in terms of the cities, what would be really useful would be we'll obviously go into much more depth in terms of the strategies for sustainability and driving this green agenda. But for those who may not be familiar, let's start with you, John. Just give us a very brief introduction to the Scottish Cities Alliance as your chair of that, but also just in terms of location and I suppose makeup for Dundee.
As you say, Richard, I've got two hats on this morning. So first of all, as chairman of the Scottish Cities Alliance, an alliance which brings together the Scottish Government and the 7 cities of Scotland, 3 of which are on this call this morning. I'm also leader of Dundee City Council, and your challenge in terms of the geographical context. So Dundee's the 4th largest city in Scotland, situated on the east coast. It's around an hour from Aberdeen, south of Aberdeen, and an hour north of Edinburgh, if that helps. And we're surrounded, if there's any golf players on the call, by Carnoustie, St Andrews and Arbroath. So very central location. And one of our, I think, claims to fame in many ways is the fact that we are a very central location. So 90% of the Scottish population lives within a 90-minute journey, which is a really unique selling point, I suppose, for us here in Dundee as well.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Jenny.
I'm Jenny Laing. I'm co-leader of Aberdeen City Council. And we're the 3rd largest city in Scotland, and we're located on the northeast coast of Scotland. And we're probably best known for being the oil capital of Europe. And we've been striving over recent years to make sure that we are getting that energy transition piece, and we have a desire to be the energy capital of Europe as we move forward. As John's mentioned there, I think the location that we have on the northeast is envied by others because of our locality and closeness to great outdoor space, great golf courses up in Aberdeen as well, and the surrounding Aberdeenshire. That's kind of what Aberdeen's about and what we hope to be in the future as well.
Great. Murray, I don't want to introduce an element of competition, but are there any good golf courses where you are?
I was just wondering how many I could name offhand. My name is Lyle, leader of Perth and Kinross Council. Just to say that Perth is one of Scotland's smaller cities, but we're located right in the centre of Scotland. We have a population of just under 100,000 people, but our location is central in Scotland, and we're located between the central belt and the north of the country. We are surrounded by a large rural community, and we have been recognised over the years as one of the best places to live in Scotland. We've had significant population growth in the last 5-10 years, and we're projected to have significant population growth over the next 10 years. Suffice to say, on the competitive element on golf courses, that I live within 5 miles of Gleneagles and have been a member there for the last 20 years.
Perfect. That's very good. Okay, I can feel that we're going to have to do a separate session here on on golf courses. I just wanted to pick up. Maybe let's start with you, Rob, if we can. When we're looking at this transition to net zero, how is this influencing? I mean, you said it's kind of included in every element now of decision making. So is that also part of the investment decisions? Just drill down a little bit more into that decision making process at Legal and General Investment Management, and particularly how the zero carbon sustainability elements really come into that.
There are a few different ways of talking about this. You won't be surprised to hear that. One angle is about screening investments. So, increasing, and this really pervades both the property side, but also infrastructure, is thinking about assets which might be challenged by climate change, and certainly developing resilience within portfolios. So just on one level, flood risk is something we look at very carefully. But there's a more progressive angle there, which is around actually how can we manage assets in such a way that they promote the energy transition. So certainly in our buildings portfolio, we're looking very hard at retrofitting and replacing fossil fuels within buildings for heating and other uses. That the capital involved in that is very significant. These are going to be very long-term investment programs, but what we have done is, I think, move from phase 1 into phase 2, which is setting our targets was phase 1, and now it's really delivering on it is phase 2. The other thing I would call out, and this is undimmed by COVID, is the degree of client interest in promoting environmental and social outcomes. This has absolutely revolutionized in the last 5 years, I would say. And so, it's also increasingly about how we allocate capital now. Clients are asking us to align their portfolios with net zero. And there's a huge amount of work to be done to do that. But I'm very excited to see that level of interest from clients.
Okay, good. And John, we already mentioned that you're chair of the Scottish Cities Alliance. But I just wanted to pick up with you on how important, I mean, we've just heard there from Rob in terms of the ways investors are beginning to look at this and how the capital is changing. How important is, I suppose, a consistent and synchronized goal or strategy, both from local and national government, to help deliver on the sort of green city strategy that is obviously something that investors are looking for as well?
I think there's a couple of important points, and one is, I suppose, the Scottish context. I think in many ways the national profile of that agenda has been paramount in unlocking some of those conversations. And both, the Scottish Cities Alliance is a partnership between local authorities and national government and its agencies, and that is a unique opportunity, I think, to influence, but also to come forward with tangible ideas, programs, initiatives that can deliver what we all want to see. There's one thing in setting a clear political agenda, but delivering it is something very different. And in the public sector, we're very good at creating frameworks and policy documents. The deliverability of them is absolutely key here. And I think that's what we've seen a sea change in and a real shift in over the last couple of years in particular, where we are actually moving to the delivery phase rather than talking about the broader framework and the context for that. And I think you can actually point to any one of those 7 cities and see some clear deliverables and actual projects that have already been delivered across the board. So there's a lot there that we're pushing forward with. And at a local level, we'll all have our own kind of climate plans and our own key focus. As Jenny said, in terms of the energy transition, oil and gas being such a big issue in Aberdeen, that will be a very different kind of context in Dundee or Glasgow. So it's how we share that experience, share that knowledge, but also learn from each other in the success stories. And I think that's one of the opportunities we'll have through the Alliance, is not only to share the good practice, but share some of the risk, because there are inherent risks in taking forward new projects, new initiatives, and new ways of doing things. And unlocking that relationship between public sector and private sector is going to be key to realising the full potential of that.
Jillian, from your point of view, I mean, it's absolutely right that deliverability also picks into the practical side of, how much can technology deliver, some of the answers to decarbonisation for the built environment. Where are we with that? And I suppose also, how do we incentivise that? Is that one of the challenges going forward?
Absolutely, I think that's one of the main challenges. So, within ARUP, we look at a wide variety of projects and technological solutions, such as from infrastructure scale, looking at the practicalities of using hydrogen within gas networks, or large-scale rollouts of electrical vehicle and battery storage charging. On a building scale, we also look at how do you design buildings to achieve net zero carbon, and how do you roll out programs for retrofitting existing buildings. And I would say there's no silver bullet, and obviously the solution differs depending on the development and the location. But a lot of those technologies do exist, and they've been around for a while, and it's often about a combination of those technologies in the right environment. So in particular in buildings, it's much more commonplace now to see ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, photovoltaics, solar hot water, and then a move towards a lot more intelligent buildings and building control. But in a way, it's much more important to get the basics right. The building insulation, the air tightness, and the efficiency of the systems before we start moving to looking at what are the new technologies or advancement in technologies. because obviously in the future it's a lot more easy to retrofit a technology, but to really improve a building fabric and get that right, that can be, you know, a significant disruption to existing buildings. I think, as you say, incentivising that change is tricky, as Rob alluded to. Capital costs are a lot more upfront. It is a much more challenging business case for a lot of clients, looking at the cost on day one, the capital cost of these projects. So it's really important to help look at the longer term paybacks and the co-benefits, and also really help our clients understand, you know, what funding and finance is available to them. And in particular, in Scotland, there's fantastic initiatives such as the Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme, which provides funding to demonstrator projects, and that can really help with the business case.
I mean, that's interesting. And Jenny, I wanted to pick up with you because I know transportation and, you know, is a big part of the decarbonisation green strategy at Aberdeen. Maybe just give us some insights in terms of, I mean, we've been talking about that, delivering a green city strategy. Maybe let's just pick up on that in terms of the delivery of it. What are the plans? What are the strategies there in Aberdeen?
You know, maybe building on some of the answers that we've heard already. I mean, John's obviously mentioned there how important cities are going to be to that green agenda. And in Aberdeen, it's more than any other city, I would, you know, because of our oil and gas links. But we see that as giving us an opportunity, actually, because of the skills and the expertise that's been built up, that we can actually move forward with that energy transition piece at a quicker pace. And, you know, I think we've shown, John mentioned there about, you know, particularly local authorities having lots of frameworks or policies, but actually delivering that on the ground is a difficult thing. And I would totally agree with that. And that's why we've come forward with a net zero vision, along with a strategic infrastructure plan that actually is, you know, detailing the projects that we'll require in order to deliver that vision. And you know, we put that through in June, following you know, information from our economic policy panel report last year about that's the direction of travel we needed to go in. We've acted very swiftly on that, set up a leadership board which has national players sitting around the table, and they'll very much be at the forefront of driving that strategy forward to the delivery phase. And you know, we mentioned there about the collaboration between local authorities and national government, and because we had that plans in place, they could clearly see that there were projects there that could deliver on that energy transition piece. We've been able to secure £62 million of funding from Scottish Government, and that will help us around particularly our hydrogen ambitions, because you know, we were mentioning there, I think Jillian mentioned about demonstrator projects and, you know, demonstrating that technology. And that's been at the forefront of what we've done over the last 5 or 6 years with our bus project, which, you know, we've seen the largest European fleet of hydrogen buses. We're building on that, you know, now Dundee and other local authorities coming in on that to work on the technology, but also around that offshore wind, which is going to be key to that green hydrogen piece. Aberdeen was the City Council was very much at the forefront of that, with the work that we did through ARUP with Vattenfall and that European demonstrator project off the coast of Aberdeen, and you know, which we're now seeing those technologies being rolled out elsewhere. And we see we've got a real opportunity because of that early work that we've done to actually capitalise on that, because of the skills that have been built up, the supply chain that's here and can easily be switched into that energy transition piece. So we see all the pieces of the jigsaw coming together, but that collaboration right across Scotland is really important, because in the scheme of the global markets, we're a small player. So we need to have that collaboration across cities to really showcase that Scotland is the place that you need to come if we're looking for that energy transition piece and the new technologies that are going to be coming on stream in the years to come.
Great, thanks very much, Jenny. And Alidad, thanks for posting that in the chat. And yes, if people would like to be in contact with any of the speakers, just send a note to us and we can arrange that so that everybody can be in contact with one another, because the idea of this is to share insights, share expertise, share views, really. Murray, I just wanted to pick up with you. There are different challenges, aren't there, for different types of areas, from urban, and obviously Perth and Kinross has a mix of urban and rural. So does that introduce different challenges for you? And I suppose, how are you dealing with those?
But I think I would say that the main focus on our sort of green energy projects at the moment has been focused around Perth, and it's really to show leadership and how we can demonstrate the benefits of that transition to a more carbon neutral future. I think in the local sort of townships, we have a number of towns really between sort of 5,000 and 15,000 in population, where these things are more challenging, but they are also being done on a local standard. And we've also done what we would call sort of pilot projects into these areas in Laing, for example, which is a population of about 10,000. We're building a new school there. We're building that school to passive house standards. Building that school to that spec has cost us roughly an extra £5 million on top of the original budgeted capital budget. So we're using that to demonstrate us and show leadership in these projects so that others in the private sector, and we're also showed that we are open for business, if you like, and doing partnership projects with the private sector and doing that. And then in Perth, we've also, we're building 2 new schools in Perth, and we're probably increasing our budget for them somewhere between 25 and 30 million pounds to build them to passive house standards, which again demonstrates that Perth is one of the best places to live and bring up your children in Scotland.
I mean, that's an interesting point around that passive house one, and engaging in smaller activities as well as the larger projects. And that picks up partly, I think, I was going to come to this later, but I'll come to it now. Thanks very much, Mark Jenkinson. Thanks for joining us, and also thanks for your question here. And Mark's question is how are the panel engaging local communities, including small businesses, on the journey to net zero? And I think that's a really interesting question, because of course each council can do large projects, but ultimately you've got to take the community with you. So does anybody want to pick that up? And I'm happy to have answers from everybody in terms of what you're doing on this, but who would like to start?
Thank you, Richard. And saying that we had a conference last Friday where we had the mayors of Ghent and Copenhagen on, speaking to local businesses, indicating, because they're, in my view, further down the road as far as their green credentials and the carbon neutral agenda is concerned. And we got a really good insight into some of the projects that they'd done, and also how the public had reacted to some of the projects, because the mayor of Ghent indicated that he had a really difficult time for the first 2 or 3 years when they moved into the sort of clean air agenda and traffic reduction, etc. But now 10 years further down the line, everybody's complimenting them for their vision and promoting these projects. So I suspect that we're in for a slightly bumpy ride in some of our communities, but I think at the end of the day, we'll all see the benefit.
Okay, good. John or Jenny, is there anything you want to pick up from your point?
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, it's going to be an ongoing dialogue, and there'll be different forms that will take. One of the events that took place recently was actually hosted by the communities. So I think there's this dynamic in terms of some of our communities leading the conversation in many ways. We're just about to start the journey of creating a climate change board, which will bring together some of the key players. I will not chair that meeting. I was very clear that it had to have an independent chair and also community involvement from environmental groups, because actually, councils are a small part of the equation in terms of delivering that net zero that we want to see in private sector in particular, but also our communities and individuals playing their part is really important. So, it encompasses every single area of everyone's life. So whether it's to do with housing and how we either retrofit or future-proof new developments, how we commute across the city. So, you know, the introduction, for example, in Dundee of 300 e-bikes, which will be happening in the next couple of months, is just another part of the equation. But if you don't take the community with you as part of that conversation, then they will fail. So I think that's an ongoing challenge, and it's very difficult because sometimes what you find is you have a very small vocal group or grouping of people who will be really useful in contributing to that conversation, but it misses out a large component of the population. So we've been having discussions around how we utilise some of the community engagement programme that we've developed previously. So participatory budgeting, for example, is a mechanism for engaging with the population. Our exercise engaged with 11,000 people, which is fairly significant. It's more than actually elected me. So I think we've got to think outside the box in terms of how we engage it and continue to engage going forward, because it has to be a conversation rather than we've done this piece of work, thanks for your contribution, we'll now go and do everything and deliver it.
And that's interesting, Jenny, isn't it? Because I suppose, how do you manage some of that? Because that links into the incentives idea that Jillian was talking about. Because obviously you can do a number of things that decarbonises all of the activities of local government, but then you've still got the other companies who are there and residents who are using heating in their own homes and those kinds of things. How do you balance that sort of carrot and stick aspect, or are there specific strategies that you're looking at?
I think it's a balance between the two, if I'm honest. And you know, we've at the moment, COVID is very much at the forefront of everybody's mind, and we see it as that being the challenges that we've got to overcome in relation to that. But actually, I see there are opportunities coming out of COVID, because it is actually, we've seen a change in the way people are living their lives. And because of that, I think we have the opportunity to build on that and make sure that, you know, when we've seen people shift into active travel, those types of things, working from home, cutting down on that emissions in relation to the travel, particularly in Aberdeen, because we, although Aberdeen City is the third largest, we have a much wider hinterland that services the work that goes on within the city. So those types of things, I think we have an opportunity now to build on those, make sure that the policies that we're bringing forward and the interventions that we're bringing forward in our, you know, we've got a socio-economic rescue plan for the city in relation to the short-term aspects of COVID. I think we've got the opportunity to build on that, and we need to get the communities involved. And we have a very car-centric city, and people are very used to travelling by car. And so we've struggled when we've looked at things like low emission zones, when we've looked at trying to, you know, promote public transport interventions. Those types of things have met, you know, a wall of protest, I suppose, from the public. But I do think because of the situation we find ourselves in now, we have the opportunity to build on that. And, you know, things like, you know, our own council house building programme that we've got at the moment, very much looking at that gold standard, creating fuel efficient homes, you know, building on our network of heat, you know, combined heat and power network that we already have in the city, and making sure that those opportunities are available for both business and residents. And, you know, I think the question related to how do you make sure that small businesses are involved, and I think councils and government have an opportunity through the procurement that we will be seeing coming forward in that rescue plan, in that energy transition, to make sure that local businesses benefit from that as a result of the spend coming from the public sector, which will have to be targeted given the extreme situation that we're finding ourselves in currently.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to pick up a little bit more that disruption from the pandemic side. Initially, there was a lot of discussion around sustainability. Obviously, if I look at my, you know, I've been sitting at my desk now here since March, in essence, whereas before I was on a plane about 3 or 4 times a week. And I suspect that I will not be returning to the travel that I had before, for example. But how are you seeing, I suppose, the disruptive elements of that? Has that accelerated your kind of views on the sustainability side, or put a brake on it? What's the situation?
You know, operationally, we've had a lot to deal with, as everyone has had, but certainly, particularly on the property side and the construction sides of our business, clearly there's been a huge amount of disruption that we've had to manage with our partners. One of the things I would say, though, is that when it comes to clients and their interest in promoting positive ESG outcomes, there's absolutely no let up in the interest in that. And I guess one of the other things that does come out of this whole discussion is this transition to net zero requires an enormous amount of investment in physical infrastructure, but skills as well. And that is inherently pro-growth, in my view. And so if you manage that in the right way, actually, this is part of the recovery from COVID. One of the things that, Jenny obviously has alluded to is, despite what I've just said about being pro-growth, clearly there are winning and losing sectors within this transition. And I think, it's really interesting to hear about how Aberdeen's responding to that. That will affect other cities as well. And one of the things we can do as investors, I think, is be partners in the investment that is required to respond to the challenges, but also the opportunities that come out of all of this.
Yeah, and I mean, Jillian, that also brings up that whole issue which we've discussed a little bit already, but in terms of collaboration, how important is that, do you think, in terms of achieving goals? We've already seen an exponential growth in data that's available, and I think that's going to grow even more for the built environment. So I suppose, how important is that going to be in helping solve some of these issues?
If I start with collaboration, we've obviously heard a lot about the collaboration happening across Scotland and the Scottish Cities Alliance already, and the power that brings. But I think it's extremely important, in particular, as we've heard, in developing those strategies, but also sharing that best practice globally to really accelerate the transition. And we try to partner with a number of governments, think tanks and advocacy groups, really making sure that we can share what we've learned with policy and decision makers and help that global best practice be implemented across the globe. So, for example, we've got a partnership with the C40 cities, and we have for over 10 years, and we provide free technical advice to them and carry out research to really help cities understand how to mitigate and prepare for climate change. But that in turn is shared not only with C40 cities, but that those strategies and that research is shared widely, publicly available to anyone who wants to have it. So that collaboration, I think, is really key in demonstrating how change can be achieved. On the point in terms of data, technological advances, I think really we're in a position that we haven't been in the past in terms of the advancement in technology and the increasing availability of data. It's bringing new opportunities to tackle climate change mitigation at scale, and really providing that evidence that people need in terms of the case for change and efficiencies. Again, we've been working through our work with Zero Waste Scotland. We work with a number of local authorities, really looking at their region-wide assessment of the potential for low carbon heat supply, for example. And we've been developing a low carbon transition planning tool, which really helps overlay a number of different data sources, such as electricity and gas networks, sewage networks, building densities, heat demands, and then really helps to identify where those opportunities for certain technologies are optimised, and really helps drive that transition at scale, and make the process a lot more efficient.
I mean, if we're looking to decarbonise the economy, then we're also looking, as Jenny mentioned there, to hydrogen, to other sources. John, maybe just highlight some of them, because I know that there's some, particularly some wind projects there. How important are those in terms of delivering this kind of lower carbon city agenda for you? What role does that play?
I mean, we see it as an absolute cornerstone of the strategy going forward, not just because of the environmental considerations, but because of the economic and social benefits that can be derived from that. Dundee's a post-industrial city, for many years over the last century, in decline in terms of that industrial heritage. And now we have a very, very kind of clear spotlight on where we are going and what we hope to achieve in that. And if I give you a couple of specific examples, which are very pertinent to this conversation, the development, for example, of the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park, which stemmed from a difficult situation where Michelin were closing their tyre manufacturing site in the city, the loss of 850 jobs. But from that early engagement, that proactive approach by both Scottish Government, Dundee City Council, and the engagement with Michelin, we developed a clear strategy and what the vision for the future is for that 32-hectare site. Michelin are a key player. They are a shareholder in the new company, as we are as the City Council. And it's that shared risk and reward, again, that we've been talking about. But having a global player like Michelin as part of the development of that site is absolutely integral to generating jobs and investment as a result, as well as addressing the issues of climate change. There's a unique opportunity there because it has 2 wind turbines. It's directly next door to a brand new £100 million waste to energy plant with a steam offtake, which can help produce hydrogen as well. So we've already signed up 3 tenants, which are the Low Emissions Resources Global, Arcola Energy and MEP Technology, all working in that hydrogen electric vehicle sphere, which is a real strong point for Dundee, but also the relationship with the Port of Dundee in terms of renewables, so manufacturing taking place in the Port of Dundee for the NNG offshore wind farm, and also for technologies like the Orbital Marine's very first commercial tidal turbine. So there's a really unique opportunity given the proximity to what's going on in the North Sea, but also some of the assets that currently exist. So we're not having to build a brand new innovation park. We have one ready to go. We have a global player, we have tenants, and we have the ability to be able to generate jobs as a result of that. So I think that's probably true for many cities. We've got some of the assets in place. It's about how you bring that together and create a vision for the future and make sure that you deliver the outcomes.
While we're on this particular topic, Jenny, just tell us a little bit more about, because obviously the transition to carbon neutral transport is important, both in terms of electrification of vehicles, but also, as I understand it, the bus system there and the double-decker bus, that's the first one in Europe, and was delivered, I think, with a European grant. Is that right? How did that come about?
The first demonstrator project, which actually was back in 2015-16, was that European funding, and really it was about us as a local authority stepping forward and saying that we wanted to test that technology, and so we've built on that because it's about us rolling out that infrastructure to support that bus network that we had, working with the 2 private sector bus companies in the city, so that public-private sector collaboration. But because we've managed to build up that technical knowledge around the hydrogen bus project, it's allowed us to really roll that out further. We built, as a local authority, the new event complex in Aberdeen, Teca, and it is actually, we have 2 hotels on site as well as the 12.5-seater, 1,000-seater arena, but it's we have an energy centre there which is powered by hydrogen, producing hydrogen, that actually will allow us to open up the rest of that development for further commercial development as we move forward and provide that energy source. But for Aberdeen, the transport project was very much at the forefront of our initial scoping of hydrogen. But we want to build on that moving forward. So we see our hydrogen hub moving very much into, that we mentioned earlier about heating for both residential and commercial properties. We see us being able to do that in the second phase, along with further transport links around ferries, trains, but also the ultimate prize, and this is not just for Aberdeen or Scotland, but the UK as a whole, it's that production of green hydrogen, because that's what will make Aberdeen a climate positive city, because it's the actual creation of that hydrogen, and then it's the export of it, whether it's throughout the rest of the UK or internationally. And that's why it's so important that we have that collaboration between cities, because as John's pointed out there are opportunities springing up all over Scotland in relation to different aspects in energy transition, and hydrogen will play a key role in that. But what we need to do is we need to identify the areas that have the best competitive advantage around that, And John's mentioned, some of the things that Dundee's got in its favour. And Aberdeen have similar things. We're very close, as I mentioned to, already, the largest offshore wind farm development when it first came on board, that European demonstrator project. And because of the ScotWind licenses that are coming out, it's very important that places like Aberdeen are bidding in for that. But we've a £370 million investment in the new harbour development, which gives that deep water opportunities. It's not tidal, so it's 24-hour access. We have space next to it. John mentioned there about the importance of having that industrial parks nearby so that companies can come in. So we're very well placed in Aberdeen for that. So we saw the demonstrator project through the transport as very much the foundations of our hydrogen ambitions. And because we've shown that we can roll that out, I think it gives people confidence that we have the ability with the supply chain, the technical knowledge, and the skilled workforce to actually deliver on that agenda moving forward. And that's the important thing, I think, for that inward investment piece, whether it's coming from national government or indeed coming from the private sector.
There's been quite a lot of discussion also around delivering the right infrastructure and those kinds of things. Murray, how important is that? I know that there's Perth West Innovation Park, for example. How important is that alongside the Tay Cities deal, those kinds of things, those larger initiatives, to be able to actually deliver on the Green City agenda?
We don't have a long history of industrial development in Perth. Our history has been steeped in the whisky industry, and we're best known for producing famous Grouse, Dewar's whisky and Bell's whisky. But we are ambitious, and we have an opportunity, I think, in Perth to become one of the UK's first smart cities, where we can use the funding that's £300 million funding that's coming from both the UK and Scottish Government to stimulate at least another £300 million in funding. Perth West being one of the projects that we hope to develop in that, and we shall develop in that, which will be a sort of logistics innovation park, which will be built on the principles of being carbon neutral from the outset. And that will hopefully feed smart energy into the city of Perth. Being a small city, we can manage that process. We have the ambitions to take the smart city energy technology right across the whole of Perth, and to do that really within the next few years. I think the funding from the Tay City deal will stimulate that progress. We have a 25-hectare site on the western edge of Perth, which is a greenfield site. It's a great opportunity to develop that. Obviously, I indicated Perth's location within Scotland makes it a critical logistical hub for access between the central belt and north of the country. So we're well placed to develop that. And with our smart energy ambitions for the domestic and commercial use within the city, I think we've really got an opportunity, and a funded opportunity, I should say, as well, to develop. And we now, are actively looking for private partners. Just to go back to Jillian's point and data sharing, I think it's really critical. And one of the things that the Cities Alliance has allowed us all to do is to share experience amongst ourselves, and that's really been, and with the Scottish Government, but that's really been one of the beneficiaries of our experience, is our ability to feed that back. A brief example would be working in health and social care and smart communications. I think in our health and social care partnership, communications between NHS and the council, we've managed to find a £4 million saving, which is really, and people not duplicating roles, not duplicating visits, etc. And we found that saving in the first 18 months of this project. And we're able to share that experience beyond.
I think that's good. Robert, I just want to pick up with you, if I can. We've spoken about some of the major projects, some of the smaller projects, how we can integrate these things, how we can make it work with communities, but certainly from the interviews that I've been doing lately, the news flow that I've been monitoring, this idea of investing with a purpose, impact investing, looking far more at the social objectives of any investment have been coming to the fore. And particularly related to the ESG side. So how does that relate for you in terms of the investment? How important is that in terms of when you're looking at an investment, particularly in a city?
I think it's fair to say it's become increasingly important within our business, but also for clients more generally. And I think there's probably two sides to it. There is a recognition that physical investments, real assets, have a lot of real world outcomes for people. And we as investors need to take account of those. So that's step one, if you like. And there's been a lot of focus on measuring social value, for instance, which is has been done in the planning process for many years. But clients are more interested in that now to understand the impact that their assets are having. But then they're about this and actually deploying capital in a way that actively seeks to promote social outcomes. And I think that's somewhat new, actually, but there's a lot of interest in that now. And just within our own business, we're looking at engaging with non-profits and sort of engaging them more in terms of what we do to promote those kinds of outcomes. Working with cities is absolutely critical here for us, because I do think city authorities have a reasonably unique role in terms of bringing different stakeholders together in a way that we can't. We can certainly bring things to the party, but we can't coordinate in the same way. And also acting as, can be both, funders of new development. They're also regulators, they're customers. They can also help to nudge local communities. So there's a really key element there as well. This social element, I think, is really key and growing very quickly.
John, just from your point of view, I mean, we've talked there about hydrogen, but I think from your perspective, there's also quite a drive, I think, in the city for electrification more generally. And I guess how much of an impact does that make in terms of reducing the carbon? Is it kind of 10% or 5% or 30%? What sort of impact does that kind of action actually have?
I mean, there's a couple of aspects to that, and you're right in saying that Dundee's been leading the way across the UK in many ways. We've got the largest fleet of public sector vehicles, electric vehicles, that is, of any local authority in the whole of Scotland. In percentage terms, of course, 10% of our taxi fleet is also electric vehicles. We've got 4 hubs located across the city now, which have solar panel technology in the roof space to help generate electricity as well as providing the electricity to vehicles. So there's a lot of work going on in that arena. And the investment has been derived from national government, particularly UK and Scottish government, of course, in terms of making sure that we can implement that. And transportation is a key sector that we need to really tackle in terms of reducing carbon output from there. We're at the start of a journey. There's other incentives as part of that. We were talking earlier about carrot and stick approach. So we're also a city that's looking at low emission zones, but as an incentive, you can park for free in any of our multi-stories. And if you are a resident of Dundee, you can charge your car for free as well. So not only is your vehicle free to run, you don't pay road tax and you don't pay parking. That's a fair incentive. It's one of the many reasons that I'm also an electric car owner as of 2 years ago, because I felt it was important to practice what I preach. The agenda, of course, also has to look at larger vehicles, so HGVs, looking at bin lorries, for example, and also coaches. So we've just created a new route between Dundee and Edinburgh, working with a company called Ember, the first coach facility, which is entirely electric, and we have integrated into our network a charging solution specific for them as well. So being proactive on that agenda is really key. But again, going back to the points that were made earlier, it has to be part of a broader mix. So electric vehicle technology, electric battery technology is not going to be the answer to all of our problems. hydrogen will be one component of that as well, and we're very much trying to ride both horses at this point in time. And Richard, it's remiss of me to forget the number, but I can't remember off the top of my head the percentage in terms of the specific around transportation. But it is a significant contribution to that broader agenda, and that's why we see it as a key driver for the strategy going forward. And we're in development for another couple of charging hubs as well. Out west, the kind of islands, Dundee is top of the list in terms of proximity to charging points, and we've also got a number of schemes looking at residential areas where there isn't ease of access to charging facilities. So we're developing pop-up charging hubs. So these will literally pop out of the street so that you can charge your vehicles, because 51% of our households are flatted or tenemental, which gives it a challenge, but also gives us a unique opportunity to test some of that technology as well.
Okay, great. We've got some questions coming in. So I'm just going to pick up a couple of those are very specific, so I'll come to those in a minute. But the first one from Petav, thanks very much for this, is what are the major headwinds, I suppose, no pun intended there, for continuing advancement of the growing ESG and green investment interest? I
think there's a couple of different, one is process in some respects, and making sure there is a clarity around process for the development of key initiatives. And the question around headwind is probably relevant, but if you look at just the way in which we approach offshore wind farms, for example, it's a long drawn out process. There is a lot of engagement, and sometimes the end result of all of that years of work is that you get nothing in terms of the benefit of that. And just the process for which licenses are permitted, etc., to go forward is quite challenging, both for the companies concerned, but also for local authorities that are engaged in that process. Commitment as well, making sure that, as I've just said, people practice what they preach. There is a lot of narrative, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot in terms of everybody signing up to that broader agenda. We need to make sure that people mean it. And that leads me to my next point, which is around financing. So, local authorities do not have the ability in the current financial climate to be able to front load all of this investment and deliver all the ambition that we want to see. It has to be a combination of private sector investment and national government. And we need to make sure that that's there from the outset, rather than, again, being a year, 2 years down the line with ambitious proposals, but we haven't got the means to deliver it. And I think that's a particular challenge, Scottish and UK government level, making sure that they deliver in terms of a financial contribution to unlock some of that potential, because there is a lot of risk in the projects and initiatives that we're all looking to take forward. We're at the very early stages of this renaissance, I suppose, and it needs to have a degree of public sector backing to reduce that level of risk, to bring and unlock the private sector contributions as well.
Okay, good. Did anybody else want to pick that up?
Maybe I'll come in just from the other side of what John said, and I endorse everything he said. I mean, one of the things that I think has been perhaps a problem at times is that people can come up with very interesting proposals which do make sense on one level, but actually the risk profile, the income volatility just can't work for long-term investors. And that's not to say that the public sector has to underwrite all the risk here. That clearly is not the right answer, but an appropriate risk sharing across different stakeholders is what we need. And I think that's where we've really been able to unlock some really big long-term regeneration initiatives, is when there's been some partnering across a number of organizations to bring different levels of risk sharing to one project to really unlock something. But as John says, if that gets left to late in the process, honestly, that will derail things entirely. It needs to be in the thought process from the outset, how you can create that risk sharing and that sensible allocation.
How does this play into the sort of winning cities agenda? Do we feel that this is, I guess this focus on green strategy is actually going to bear fruit, not only in terms of benefit, I guess, for sustainability overall, decarbonisation overall, but also to boost cities as a kind of reward for doing it, because it's a focus for investors, but also for people who want to live there, work there and invest there?
I think absolutely. And I think just to pick up on some of Rob's comments as well, in Perth we've done an analysis of the emissions that have come from the public sector vis-a-vis the private sector, and the public sector is responsible for between 7 and 8% of the emissions annually coming from the city of Perth. So there is a huge need for engagement from the private sector. And we all need to change our view, I think, slightly as far as this is concerned, from being relatively risk averse to becoming more risk aware. We're all going to have to take some risks in the next 10, 15 years on these sort of longer term projects, and we need to be really more risk aware rather than, I know historically in local government we've been pretty much risk averse in most areas. But I think there's huge opportunities there for us to give our communities a better standard of living, a cleaner standard of living, and also a more sustainable standard of living going forward. If we don't, the consequences of where we need to be in 10, 15 years' time would be much more expensive, and we would have really damaged our environment again before we get there.
What's the key ambition for you in terms of Green City strategy? And also, how positive are you about the future impact of these initiatives?
I mean, I think today's discussion's been really helpful. Hopefully, those who are attending have got a flavour of how we're trying to push forward, particularly the 7 cities in Scotland with that environmental agenda. I suppose for Aberdeen, I mean, what's driven us forward are both a mixture of that environmental aspects, but also about that economic growth. Because we've had great economic growth in Aberdeen over the last 50 years. We've been fortunate. But what we mustn't do is rest on our laurels. We must make sure that we are capitalising on the technology and the skills that we've built up over that piece to help propel us into what the future requires us to do around that energy transition piece. So I suppose from our perspective, it's about delivering on that vision. You know, we come back to the discussion at the very beginning about it's all very good to have policies and strategies, but if you don't actually deliver on the ground, they're not any use to anybody. And I want to make sure that Aberdeen continues to be a thriving city that attracts that inward investment, but it also attracts people who want to live and work here in the future. And it also holds on to our young people, because because we have a little bit of a more remote location than some in the Central Belt, and we often, see that drift of our young people maybe out with the region. We want to make sure the opportunities are there for them. And what we probably maybe haven't touched on enough today is around that skills element, because we've been asking about what the challenges are. And that's an area where I see that we really do need to start pushing forward with what types of skills do we need in order for us to promote the energy transition and indeed bring in that wealth for Scotland moving forward. And we need to work both public, private sectors together in order to make sure that, and as local authorities, we are the deliverers of education. We need to make sure that that is shaped up to meet the needs of the economy of Scotland in the future. So I suppose from that element, it's about us making sure that we are putting those policies on the ground and delivering for everyone and attracting that inward investment that will keep us economically buoyant and help us to play a major role in the Scottish and UK economies as we have done over the last 40 or 50 years.
Great. Gillian, what's your sort of, I suppose, key aim for this, and are you positive about the future impact?
I guess firstly picking up on the level of optimism. I'm extremely optimistic about the future. If I look at our clients, ranging from national government to private organisations, there's a real imperative now around setting those carbon reductions, but also wider sustainability objectives. And I think the message has really moved from the right thing to do to a real business imperative and a real necessity. So I think that gives a real positive message in regards to our ambition. We really see our role as enabler, really trying to help. How do you meet those more broad and longer term ambitions in a real tangible and practical way, and how can we help with those steps to get those longer term ambitions met, whether that be technical solutions or identifying funding and finance, sharing best practice, and just really acting as linking up different parties to allow that collaboration to happen. So yeah, extremely optimistic.
Okay, good. And Murray, you obviously talked at the beginning also about setting a bold ambition. So what's the key ambition and positive?
Yes, I am positive, and we've already enacted several examples, and there's other examples you've heard today. I think one of the things that is key to us over the next decade is the Tay City deal, which is going to be a significant economic stimulus Tayside-wide to Dundee on ourselves. A critical part of that is the Perth West Eco Park development, which is a 25 hectare greenfield site, which will allow us to develop the technologies and the infrastructure in our ambition to have a smart energy network, which is citywide. And because we're a small city, relatively compact, these things are achievable if we have the ambition to do it. And we do have that ambition. And I think I'm very optimistic that we will get on the track for this. The Tay City deal should be signed off shortly, and then we can make progress with these.
Rob, what's your take on this?
Our investment portfolio, engages in this in so many different ways. We have to retrofit buildings. We have to build them differently with funding renewable energy. We're also, getting involved in a lot of the associated technologies that need to happen as well. EV charging we've talked about. We've funded part of the smart meter rollout. We're investing in battery storage. This just pervades so much of what we do in real estate and infrastructure. It's the right thing to do, but equally, we look at the climate science, we look at the risks around not hitting net zero, and it's clear it's also good business. So really everything is pointing in that direction. There are undoubtedly headwinds to navigate, but I am optimistic that we are going to navigate them and meet these ambitious targets.
Okay, great. And John?
I can't say much more than what others have already contributed. Very positive about the future, and even during the course of the last 6 months, I've seen how much progress has been made. Again, Michelin unlocking multi-million-pound investments, generating 3 new tenants, working in some key development sectors. So, in spite of COVID-19 and everything we're dealing with, we are still seeing a momentum behind our programme and our ambitions for the future as well. And I think the key thing for me is around the point that Rob just made about the practical, but also the moral obligation that we all have to kind of spearhead efforts on this agenda, but also showcase what they deliver to the people that ultimately vote for me and that are out there. And we need to make it real for folk. And if I give you just one example, the retrofitting piece that we've been doing as the largest landlord in the city has already reduced fuel poverty in the city in the last 3 years by 7%. It's hugely significant. So you can see how a direct investment actually has socio-economic benefits to people's health, well-being and income. So it's just making sure that we link all of those various investments back to real world and making sure it is a real thing for people. Is
there an issue with people for Nuno in terms of maybe this is for you, Robert, in terms of putting in, specifying BREEAM and LEED because of planning permissions, but actually not really. It's box ticking rather than a genuine aim.
I must say, I can't see the detail of the question, Richard, but just on the general point, I can only really answer for our business, right? So there is definitely a drive towards commissioning buildings that can be operated in a very low energy sustainable way, but we absolutely are committed to then operating them in that way and playing our part in that. Now, of course, we're only part of the answer because it's actually the occupiers of the building that control a huge amount of the energy consumption. So a very big part of what we're working on at the moment is how do we help occupiers to occupy buildings in a low carbon way. And this can be, we talked about some of the sort of what you might call smaller scale initiatives that we might think about. We've got a fast growing portfolio of apartment buildings in our build to rent portfolio, and recently we've been running some kind of virtual competitions to help people manage down their energy use. For our SME occupiers, we're working with the Energy Systems Catapult to promote some kind of some software solutions to help SMEs understand how to manage down their energy consumption. So it's a broad answer to what sounded like a very specific question, but I think that the critical part is that we need to do what we can to nudge, promote occupiers to reduce their energy consumption.
Great, that's perfect. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for sharing your views. Thank you also for all of your questions, your comments. Really useful for us to be able to engage in those as well. Fantastic topic, I think. And I'm really looking forward to see how this develops. And also for me, it's been incredibly useful to learn some of the initiatives that are happening across Scotland that I wasn't aware of up until researching this, and also this discussion today. So thanks very much, and look forward to continuing this discussion when we look at this next time. Thanks very much to everybody for joining us, and thank you to the speakers. Thanks very much.